It was supposed to be a love story, a husband, a wife, and a future full of dreams. But one night, everything changed. A lifeless body on the cold kitchen floor. A husband screaming for help. A crime that shattered a family, and a truth so twisted it left even the most seasoned detective speechless. The person they least expected was the one who wanted her gone the most. What drives someone to destroy their own flesh and blood? What happens when love turns to obsession and obsession turns deadly? Stay with me, because this case will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust. It started like any other love story. A man, a woman, a promise of forever. Daniel Carter and Emma Carter had built a life that seemed unshakable. Two young souls deeply in love, carving out a future together. To their friends, their marriage was something to admire. To their families, it was a union that brought joy. But love is fragile. And when another presence enters the picture, one that should bring warmth, comfort, and wisdom, it can sometimes bring something else entirely, something cold, something jealous, something deadly. The call came in at 2:43 a.m. A frantic voice, a husband sobbing, his wife unresponsive. I don't know what happened. She's just lying here. Daniel's voice cracked through the receiver. Within minutes, first responders arrived. Emma Carter was found on the kitchen floor, her lips tinged with blue, an overturned glass of wine near her fingertips. Prescription bottles scattered across the counter. It had all the signs of a tragic overdose. At first glance, it seemed clear. A terrible accident, or maybe something worse. Maybe Emma had given up on life. But there was one problem. One detail that didn't add up. Emma had never been diagnosed with depression. She had no history of substance abuse. Friends describe her as vibrant, full of life. So why would she do this? And then came the whisper, soft at first, but growing louder in the days that followed. This wasn't an accident. Emma didn't do this to herself. Emma had someone in her life that no one suspected. A woman who should have loved her like a daughter. A woman who was supposed to be a source of comfort, a protector. Marta Carter, Daniel's mother. A woman who had suffered great loss in her own life. A widow for over a decade. A mother who had raised her son with tenderness, watching him grow into the man she adored. The man she wanted to keep close. Always. At first, it was subtle. Little remarks at family gatherings. Emma, are you sure you know how to take care of him? Marta would say with a forced smile. Daniel never used to eat this way. He liked home-cooked meals, not takeout. You look tired, sweetheart. Marriage can do that to a woman. But there was something else. Something deeper. Something unspoken. Daniel was blind to it. Emma wasn't. She could feel it every time Margaret looked at him. A lingering gaze that held just a little too long. A soft touch on his arm when she laughed at his jokes. The way she spoke about his childhood, as if those were the best years of her life. Years before Emma was in the picture. It wasn't just a mother's love. It was something more. The shift happened after their wedding. The warmth Margaret once showed Emma began to cool. The playful banter turned into passive-aggressive comments. The phone calls to Daniel grew more frequent. She doesn't appreciate you like I do, Danny. Marriage is hard, I know, but some people just aren't meant for it. If she truly loved you, she wouldn't keep you away from your own mother. Then the fights began. Emma would catch Margaret whispering to Daniel late at night. Texts deleted before she could read them. Invitations to dinner that curiously excluded his wife. And then came the moment Emma would never forget. The night she overheard Margaret's voice through the thin walls of their home. I could love you better than she ever could. Emma froze. The blood in her veins turned to ice. Did she just hear what she thought she heard? Did Daniel hear it too? But when she stepped into the room, Margaret's expression was unchanged. A smile, soft and sweet. "Oh, Emma, you look like you've seen a ghost. Are you feeling okay?" That was the moment Emma knew she was in danger. But knowing wasn't enough to save her. 3 months later, she was dead. And the only person who didn't seem surprised? Margaret Carter. The police ruled it an overdose. But who had access to her medication? Who had the power to make it look like she had taken her own life? Who had the most to gain from Emma being gone? And what did Margaret whisper to Daniel in the days after her death? "Now you don't have to worry about her anymore." Was this a tragic accident or something far more chilling? Did Daniel ever suspect the truth? Or was he just another pawn in his mother's game? And if the one person you trusted most was the one who wanted you gone, would you even see it coming? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you think you've heard shocking cases before, stay tuned. Because this one, it's only just beginning. The funeral was small, quiet. Emma's friends sat in stunned silence, their eyes red from tears. Her parents clutched each other as the casket was lowered into the ground. And Daniel, he stood there motionless, staring at the grave of the woman he had sworn to love forever. And just a few steps behind him stood Margaret Carter, her hand on his shoulder, her voice a soft whisper in his ear. "You're free now, Danny. It should have been over. A tragic accident, a grieving husband, a heartbroken mother-in-law offering comfort." But then police uncovered something shocking. And that's when everything changed. The first crack in the story came just days after the funeral. A neighbor, a single detail, one that had been overlooked. "I saw her that night," the neighbor said. "I saw Margaret outside their house." It was nearly 1:30 a.m. hours before Daniel's panicked 911 call. Hours before Emma was found cold and lifeless on the kitchen floor. Why was Margaret there in the middle of the night? And why had she never mentioned it? When detectives questioned her, Margaret's answer was simple. "I was worried about them. They'd been fighting. I wanted to check on my son." It sounded reasonable, a mother's concern. But then came the second crack. Emma's toxicology report. Yes, there were sleeping pills in her system, but not just the one she had been prescribed. A different medication, a stronger one that had never been found in their home. So, how did it get there? And who had given it to her? The police started looking closer at Margaret, and what they found was disturbing. A pharmacy receipt, tucked away in her purse. A prescription filled just days before Emma's death. The same drug found in Emma's bloodstream. The investigators had a theory. A chilling, calculated plan. Emma's drink had been spiked. The medication slipped in, dissolving, its taste masked by the deep red of the wine she sipped that night. Slowly her body weakened, her vision blurred, her limbs heavy, and then a shadow in the doorway, a hand pressing against her throat, a final breath, stolen in the dead of night. But if this was true, if Margaret Carter had done the unthinkable, where was the evidence? Was it just suspicion? Or was there something more? Something they had all missed? Then detectives discovered something they weren't prepared for. A journal, hidden in Margaret's bedroom, and inside, pages filled with longing, obsession, desire. He was mine before she took him. She doesn't deserve him. One day it will be just the two of us. But even with all of this, it wasn't enough. No fingerprints. No direct proof tying her to Emma's death. She had been careful. Too careful. And Daniel? He refused to believe it. "She's my mother," he told detectives. She would never hurt Emma. It wasn't just denial. It was loyalty. A lifetime of trust unshaken. Until the final piece fell into place. A security camera. A single frame. Buried in hours of footage. The side door of Emma and Daniel's house, unlocking from the outside. At 1:32 a.m., Margaret, was this the moment she slipped inside? Did she stand over Emma as she lay unconscious, watching, waiting? And when the time came, did she feel regret? Or was it something else? The twisted satisfaction of removing the one thing standing between her and the son she loved in all the ways a mother shouldn't. Tell me in the comments, do you think this was her plan all along? And if Daniel had opened his eyes sooner, could he have stopped it? Because what happened next would change everything. The weight of the evidence was growing. The prescription receipt, the security footage, the journal filled with chilling confessions. Yet, even with every puzzle piece fitting perfectly, there was still one thing missing, a confession. Margaret Carter had stayed silent, refusing to say a word. She was grieving, she insisted, devastated over the loss of her daughter-in-law. I would never hurt Emma, she said, voice trembling in front of detectives. She was like a daughter to me. The words were spoken through tears, through sobs that made her seem almost fragile, almost believable. But the police weren't buying it, and neither was Daniel. Something had changed. He wasn't the same man who had defended his mother weeks before. He had replayed that night over and over in his head. The timeline, the inconsistencies, the way Margaret held him at the funeral, whispering in his ear like she had done when he was a boy, comforting him in times of sorrow. Only now, that same whisper made his skin crawl. I'm here for you, Danny. I'll always be here for you. It didn't feel like comfort anymore. It felt like a trap. And then Daniel made a decision. He would go see his mother. Alone. What happened in that house that night? No one knows for sure. But what we do know, what Daniel later told detectives, was that the moment he stepped through that door, he could feel it. Something was waiting for him. And it had been waiting for a long time. You look so tired, Margaret said, reaching for his face, brushing a hand over his cheek. I haven't been sleeping, Daniel admitted. You shouldn't be alone, Danny. It's not good for you. You need someone who understands you, who's always understood you. Silence. Then Daniel spoke. Did you do it? The words cut through the air like a blade. Cold. Direct. Margaret's smile barely faltered. Do what, sweetheart? You know what I'm asking. Danny, you're upset. You're confused. Grief can do that to people. I saw the security footage, Mom. I know you were there that night. A pause. Then the smallest tilt of her head. The barest flicker of something in her eyes. Everything I did was for you. And there it was. A confession. But not in the way the police had expected. She didn't see it as a crime. To her, it was an act of love. Emma had been the problem. Emma had been the obstacle. And now, Emma was gone. But Margaret wasn't finished. I waited, I waited for you to come back to me, she told Daniel. I knew it would take time. That's why I did it gently. She didn't feel a thing. I made sure of that. She reached for his hand, her voice soft, tender. You don't have to be alone anymore, Danny. We can be happy now. So this was the truth. She hadn't just wanted Emma out of the picture. She had planned it, carefully, methodically. She had poisoned her, knowing the drugs would weaken her body, knowing she wouldn't be able to fight back. And then she had ended it, smothered her, held her down until the life slipped from her lungs. And she had done it with love. Or at least, that's what she had convinced herself. What kind of mind justifies something so horrific? How does love twist into something so unrecognizable, so monstrous? Could anyone have stopped her? Could Daniel? Could Emma? Or was this always going to happen? Tell me in the comments. Could you have seen the warning signs? And if you did, what would you have done? The truth was out. Margaret Carter had confessed, not in the way the police expected, not in words of guilt, but in whispers of devotion. She believed she had done the right thing. And now she would have to answer for it. But justice is rarely simple. And what happened next shocked even the most hardened prosecutors. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that wraps around a room, suffocating every breath. Margaret sat at the defense table, dressed in a navy blue blazer, her silver hair neatly styled. She wasn't shackled. She wasn't trembling. She sat tall, composed, eyes scanning the crowd. But the real weight of the trial wasn't in the evidence or the legal arguments. It was in the people. Daniel sat on the witness stand, his face pale, his eyes hollow. The boy who had once loved his mother more than anything was now testifying against her. "I trusted her," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought she loved Emma. I thought she loved me." A pause. And then the question that changed everything. "Did you ever suspect your mother was in love with you?" Silence. Daniel swallowed. Then finally he spoke. "I ignored the signs," he admitted. "I didn't want to believe them." And then Margaret spoke. She had remained quiet through most of the trial, letting her attorney fight for her, insisting on her innocence, claiming she had been framed. But when she finally took the stand, she said something that made the air in the courtroom turn ice cold. She smiled, and with the softest voice, she looked at Daniel and said, "I did it for us, Danny, and I would do it again." There it was, the truth, spoken with no remorse. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours. The verdict? Guilty. First-degree murder. Life in prison. No possibility of parole. But even with the case closed, even with Margaret behind bars, the damage she left behind was permanent. Daniel disappeared from the public eye, sold the house, moved states, changed his name. Because how do you live with something like that? How do you move on from knowing the person who raised you was capable of something so monstrous? Emma's family still visits her grave every Sunday. Her mother leaves fresh lilies. Her father refuses to speak Margaret's name. But the story doesn't end there, because just a year after her conviction, Margaret made a request from behind prison walls. A chilling, final request. She wanted to see Daniel. She wrote him letters, dozens of them. "I forgive you," she wrote. "I know you didn't mean to betray me. I'll wait for you, Danny. One day we'll be together again." He never responded, and maybe that was his only way of surviving. What drives someone to such madness? Was Margaret always this way? Or did something snap inside her, turning motherly love into deadly obsession? And the biggest question of all, could this have been stopped? Would you have seen the signs? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Because stories like this, they don't just happen in movies. They happen in real life. And sometimes they happen right next door. The trial was over. The sentence had been handed down. Margaret Carter would never walk free again. Justice had been served, or had it? Because long after the courtroom doors had closed, long after the final verdict had been read aloud, one question remained. Was Daniel a victim, or was he something more? He had ignored the signs. He had refused to see what was in front of him, the way his mother clung to him, the way she whispered in his ear, the way she turned his wife into an enemy in his own home. He had been blind, or had he chosen to be? Could Emma's murder have been prevented? Did Daniel bear any responsibility for what happened? Or was he just another casualty of Margaret's twisted mind? And what about Margaret herself? Was she always capable of this? Or did something in her break along the way? Had she always been this woman? Or had years of loneliness, of loss, of watching another woman take the only person she truly loved, driven her to madness? And if love could turn into something this dark, could it happen again? Could it be happening right now? To someone you know? To someone you love? What do you think? Was justice truly served? Should Daniel have faced consequences for ignoring the warning signs? Or was he as much a victim as Emma? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more shocking true crime cases, stories that reveal the darkest corners of human nature, make sure to subscribe. Because some crimes, they don't just make headlines. They stay with you forever.